Hello, my name's Aviva, and today I wanted to share with you how my June reading month went. So I did end up getting through a total of 22 books. 4 of them I did DNF though, and a handful of them I didn't DNF, but I really wish that I did. So overall, not the best reading month for me so far this year, but it's okay because honestly, my head was like not in the reading space very much. I was doing other things this month. I had other priorities. I went on vacation this month. I spent a weekend in Las Vegas while I was on my way to LA for a friend's wedding, and just overall, like I was just doing other things, and that's totally okay. And then happens to be, I also just think that unfortunately I picked up a handful of like very bad books in a row. So it is what it is. And I'm hoping to not put myself into a reading slump. Hopefully July will be better. We're going to try to stay positive so that I don't get into a bad mood. But either way, with that said, I did end up doing a mid-month wrap up this month. So everything that I read in the first half of the month, I'm not going to be mentioning in today's video. I'll have that video linked down below in case you missed it and you wanted to check it out. So we're just going to be going through the books that I read in the second half of the month, and happens to be 3 out of my 4 DNFs were in the past 2 weeks. So I wanted to go through them first. And therefore I'm doing this video a little bit out of order of how I read them, but it's okay. It doesn't really matter. So yeah, let's go through my DNFs first to just get them out of the way. First up, I read The Gilded Wolves by this author that I'm not going to try to pronounce her name because I'm just going to butcher it. But either way, I made it 18% into this audiobook before I decided to DNF it. I wasn't really vibing with everything about it. It was third person, which is not my favorite type of writing style. It was multiple POV, and I was having a hard time following all of the characters. And also it was very info dumpy, like world building, magic system, everything along those lines. It was going in one ear and out the other. I couldn't really like grab a hold of the story. So I just decided to DNF it. It might have been a little bit early, but I don't really care. But either way, I also DNF'd this book called Serpentine by Shelby something. I'm not gonna pronounce that name either because I will butcher it. But either way, I made it 40% into this audiobook before I decided to DNF it. And honestly, the only reason I made it that far into this book was because GOODREADS had such good ratings and reviews for it that I thought that it was just gonna get better as it goes. But honestly, I wasn't connecting to the characters. I wasn't connecting to the storyline. Everything about it, I was just super, super bored. Like I literally rather have sat there and listened to absolutely nothing, like sit in silence, than keep on reading this book. And that is why I decided to finally give up on it, even though I know that a lot of people really enjoy this story. And it's funny because once I decided on it and then I posted it to my Instagram, because I always post like right away when I'm finishing a book or anything like that. I'll post it to my stories before I come on here and share, with you like, wrap ups and stuff like that. And when I posted about it that I was DNFing it, I can't tell you how many DMs I got for this book. Like literally like hundreds of DMs. People were like, oh, I DNF'd it too. Or it's like, oh, I really hated this book also. Or, oh, you're not missing out on anything. Like I really cannot tell you how many DMs. Like I couldn't answer them all. Like that was how many I got. And it just made me feel like so much better about DNFing this because I really thought that this was like a very beloved series. And then Instagram made me feel much better about it, that it was the book and not me, because I was really feeling like it was me because I was having like such a bad reading month. But supposedly it wasn't. Supposedly this book actually sucked. So if you liked it, I'm happy you did. But unfortunately me and a lot of my Instagram followers didn't enjoy it. So yeah, DNF'd this at 40% and very much do not regret it. But then after this, I also DNF'd one more book that I'm sharing with you today, which is Settling the Score by R.S. Gray. So this is the first book in her Summer Games companion series, and it also happens to be a spin-off from Scoring Wilder, which is a standalone that I read by her last year and I really enjoyed. And this book takes place like 5 years after that one. And anyway, in this story, you're following this girl who is an Olympics soccer player, and she's going to be going to the Rio 2016 Summer Games. And when she gets there, she goes to a party and she meets this very famous Olympic swimmer that's like from Britain, and he's like a duke and everything like that, and they have a great moment together, and then they're gonna end up having a relationship of sorts over the month that they're there for the Summer Olympics. So I ended up DNFing this book at 60%, and to tell you why, I have to give you a minor spoiler. So if you don't want to hear the spoiler for this book, then just skip to the next book that I'm holding up. But either way, the thing about this book was that this guy was actually like, because he was a duke and he was all fancy and everything like that, he was betrothed to somebody else. His parents had set it up. He didn't really want to marry this girl, but like he has to do his like family duty of sorts. So he was stuck in this betrothal and he was supposed to marry this other girl. And then he meets the girl in this book, and then all of a sudden he wants to break off the betrothal. So I don't know why I made it 60% into this book before DNFing, because I should have like seen where it was going, but I kept holding on because I thought that like something was going to change and was maybe going to go uphill, but I was very much wrong, because by the time that the fiance ended up showing up in this book, that is the moment that I decided to DNF it. Like this fiance was one of those girls who was like oh, I'm perfect and sweet and everybody loves me and like I'm just amazing in every single way. And she was acting that way like when the guy was around, but then the second that the guy left, all of a sudden she was being like a real bitch and like blackmailing this girl and is like, oh, I'm gonna get him back, like don't worry, like our engagement isn't over, yada yada yada. And I was just like, okay, I've had enough. I hate petty drama. I hate other women drama. I hate anything along the lines of cheating. And honestly, I was really surprised that I made a 60% in before I gave up on it. But like, I'm very not upset that I decided to DNF this book. The only good thing about it was that I got to see a lot of the characters from the previous book scoring wilder. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And I was just really upset that I let this book haunt my TBR for like a year. I'm pretty sure it was sitting on my shelves for at least a year until I finally picked it up. And I'm just upset that I let it like, you know, sit in the back of my brain for so long and then I picked it up and hated it. So whatever. Anyway, I finally picked this up after forever and I DNF'd it at 60%. And I'm very happy that I did that. So yeah, Settling the Score by R.S. Gray. But anyway, after that, I also ended up picking up Wildcat by Rebecca Genshak. And this is one of those books where I didn't DNF it, but I really wish that I did. So in this book, you're following this guy who is like a pro hockey player, and he ends up having a relationship with this girl who is his coach's daughter. Like they have a one-night stand, they don't realize who each other are. And then after the fact, they notice, like they realize who each other are. And that is when, you know, the rest of the story is going to go down. So I didn't really love this book because it reminded me a lot of The Risk by Elle Kennedy, which is the second book in the Briar You Companion series, which is the spin-off series from the Off-Campus series. And I just thought that this was a much worse, much more basic and cringy version of that book. Like I loved that book and I hated this one for a lot of reasons. Like basically everything about the book I hated. I really don't know why I made it until the end of the book. Like I thought the characters were childish. I thought that it was very cringy, like multiple places in the book. Also, like it was giving off this like forbidden vibe, like, oh, well, you're my coach's daughter, we shouldn't be together. Except the second that they came out to the coach, like all of a sudden he didn't care. He's like, oh, you want to be with my daughter? Sure, yeah, just treat her right. And it was like, and like everything about, like everything that was like a problem in this book, like, oh, she quit school and she didn't want to tell her parents, but then the second that she did, her parents were okay with it. Like all of the problems were like not problems at the end. So everything that happened in this book and the way that it played out, I was just like, really, why am I keeping on reading this? Like I should have DNF'd it, and then I got further and I'm like, ugh, I really should have DNF'd it here. And then I got further and I just was like, really should have DNF'd it. And then I somehow made it to the end and I didn't DNF it, but I really wish that I did. So very much do not recommend this book. If you're down for like, you know, a very classic new adult hockey romance, just go and reread the Off-Campus series. Like you'll have a much better time than reading this like much more basic, bland version of it. So sorry to anybody who loved this book, but I really did not enjoy it. So yeah, 2 stars for this one. And then after that, I also wanted to share with you Switch by Adriana Locke, which is the 3rd book in the Landry Family Companion series. And this is another one of those books where I didn't DNF it, but I really wish that I should have because it didn't get any better as I got later into the book. So I really liked the 1st book in this series. I didn't like the 2nd book in this series because it felt a little bit similar to the 1st book, but it was like a worse version of it. And then I thought that I would like this one because I thought it would be like much different. I liked the guy that was going to be in this book because I met him in the first 2 books and I was like really vibing with him, and I knew that this was going to be like a workplace environment of sorts, so I thought it was going to be a good time. And then unfortunately I ended up hating it. So in this book, you're following this guy who basically runs his family's business, and one day he gets like a new secretary and then they're just going to have a romance. And the issue is that it was like instant attraction, which I'm never a fan of, but I don't DNF a book with instant attraction because I feel like sometimes they could turn it around and like it is what it is, but I always hate it. So I'm always like wary once I see that. And this was very heavy on the instant attraction. It's like I see this girl and then all of a sudden I can't keep my dick in my pants. Like that was literally how it was. And I just didn't really like the way that it played out. It's like you can have like a steamy office romance, but like it doesn't have to be an I'm falling in love with you romance. It could just be like a romance. And I didn't see why they had this connection. And I also didn't really like this girl because like she was supposed to be really professional and she was supposed to like really need this job. Like she really, really needed the job. And then she was just like trying to seduce the boss, like right off the bat because she really liked him. And like at one point she even like threatened to quit just to try and like tempt him. And I'm just like, what the hell are you thinking you're doing? Like, I just really didn't like how it was playing out and how they were like circling each other and everything about it. I just didn't really vibe with it. It felt like a very basic, very unoriginal office steamy romance, like very novella vibes. And it was just like, it wasn't for me. So unfortunately, I hated it. I did make it to the end and I really wish that I had DNF'd it at some point, but I didn't. So either way, that is that. And then after this, I ended up picking up another book by Adriana Locke, which is Like You Love Me. So this is a childhood best friends to strangers to lover situation with a marriage of convenience. And I'm not usually the hugest fan of childhood friends to strangers to lovers, but I always will give them a shot because you never know, maybe you'll find one that won't bother me. But unfortunately, this is one that did bother me. And the reason why I don't generally generally love this trope is because I always find that the relationship and the connection that these two characters have are too much based in the past and not enough in the present. And that is definitely how I felt with this book. Like right when they met again, like as adults, like all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, we have this amazing connection. Like, why am I so comfortable around you? Why do I feel this way? Why? And it was really bothering me. And I didn't really like that whole aspect of it. And then on top of it, the whole marriage of convenience, like I didn't really like how that played out. Like, first of all, this guy, he was engaged to somebody else at the time that he applied for this like dream job of his. And then by the time that the guy that he was applying for got back to him, he already had broken his engagement. And the person that he was applying for was like, oh, I'm very into like family. I would love to come and meet you in person and like see your fiance because I really respect a man who, you know, is planning to get married or something like that. And he's like, oh crap, I really want this job, but I don't have the fiance anymore. And I don't want to look like whatever it is that he was going to look like, you know, like he didn't want to look like he wasn't a family man, you know? So basically, when he meets this girl again, he's like, oh, well, we already have a great connection. Would you do me a solid and maybe marry me so that I can get my dream job? And she's like, well, why would I? And he's like, well, you need a little bit of money for this inn that you had inherited from your grandmother that isn't doing well. Like, she had like $5,000 that she owned in taxes. So she's like, okay, sure, you pay off my taxes, I'll marry you, because why the hell not? And I just thought that that was not a great reason to marry a guy. Like $5,000 for marrying someone, like, I'm sorry, but like, I don't think that's enough money. Like, could just be me, but I didn't really like buy that very much. And then I also didn't like that, like, you know, she was married at one point and like, I don't know, it was like going down that way of like her ex or something like that. She didn't have a good ex. And I'm just like, he was about to be married to someone else a month ago. She had an ex-husband that she was married to before this. And like, you guys had such different lives, like between the span of when you knew each other in the past and when you knew each other in the present. And I just didn't really buy that you had this amazing connection that could cancel out those however many years, you know what I mean? So I just didn't really vibe with it. I did make it to the end, and honestly, I cannot even remember what happened by the end of it. Like, in my head, I DNF'd it, but I just know that I did make it to the end. I just can't even remember how it ended up like finishing up. So either way, wish that I DNF'd this one too, but unfortunately I didn't. But also this one could be because like I ended up reading it while I was like on the plane and like while I was on vacation and everything like that. So could have been a case of wrong time, but I really don't think it was. I really think that like I wouldn't have liked this book if I picked it up at a different time. So either way, with that said, let's move on. Next up, I also did read Sadie by Courtney Summers. So this is, I think it's YA, but either way, it's a thriller. And you're following this girl who, her sister was murdered and she knew who murdered her sister. So she tries to go and try tracking the guy down. And at the same time that she's doing that, a podcast picks up on her story. And the podcast is trying to track down this girl. So you're following, it's like very interesting how it was set up. And honestly, it was not a bad time. I don't know if I said this yet, but I listened to this via audio and it was honestly like, it was a solid audiobook. Thrillers are not my thing though, and I didn't really expect for this book to go in the way that it did. There are a lot of trigger warnings that I recommend looking up for this story. There was stuff like molestation, child abuse, child pornography, things along those lines of like child, not good sexual things, and then also like alcoholism, and I don't even know what. There was just a lot of really like trigger warning things in this book, and all of them I just really didn't like. I didn't really enjoy reading about that. Like, I didn't know that that was what this book was really going to be about, and it ended up being very heavily about that. And I didn't necessarily love reading about it, but I also was like very into the story as I was reading. I'm like, well, I want to know what's going to happen next, so I kept going, but I don't know if I really enjoyed the topics of the book, if that makes sense. And happens to be the ending really got to me. I was like, holy crap, it ended that way. Like, I'm still thinking about it now. So I guess it was a good book, but it just wasn't my type of book. So I gave another genre a shot, and I think I've had enough of it for a while. So I don't know when the next time I will pick up a thriller is. But either way, I read this and it was out of my comfort zone, but I did it anyway. So kind of happy that, you know, I ventured out of the romance genre for half a second. But anyway, after this, I also did end up picking up Hands Down by Mariana Zapata. So this is a book that I wasn't necessarily planning on reading because it is a childhood friends to strangers to lovers situation as well, which, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of that trope. But I decided that because I only had like 4 books left with Mariana Zapata's backlog, that I'm just going to read them all. So this is one that I read even though I didn't think that it was going to be my favorite type of book, and it wasn't. But it's actually funny because it wasn't not my favorite for the reasons that I thought. I actually think that they built up the present day relationship so freaking well. Like, because Mariana Zapata is like never in a rush to get to the ending, like it's such a slow burn and it has like such a slow pace, it actually worked in its favor for the trope. Like, yes, we got to see a lot of like how they were really good friends in the past, but we also built up the present day relationship so well that I'm not complaining about the trope of the book. I actually just didn't really think that these two characters had a very romantic connection. Like the one thing that I love about Mariana Zapata books is the way that when they end, all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I totally love that and I need more. And when I ended this book, I really didn't feel that way. It was very like, it was a very unfulfilling ending, and I honestly like didn't really feel the connection. Like, these two people should have been like soulmate best friends, not romantic soulmates, if you know what I mean. Like, I think that they were great as best friends, but I didn't really feel the romantic connection. And by the time that we got to the point where the romance was like kicking in, I found it to be a little bit cringy because I just like wasn't really feeling it romantically, even though I really liked their, you know, the connection that they had throughout the book. So I liked the build up of it, but then it didn't make that churn from friends to lovers for me personally. And therefore, I didn't absolutely love it. I'm still happy I read it because it was still a Mariana Zapata book and it gave me a lot of those Mariana Zapata feels. But unfortunately, the ending didn't hit as hard as most of her other books have hit for me. So yeah, that is hands down by Mariana Zapata. And then I also ended up reading Redeemed by Lauren Asher, which is the 4th book in the Dirty Air Companion series. And this book has been sitting on my TBR for such a long time. So I'm very happy that I finally read it, and I didn't hate it, but I didn't absolutely love it. So in this book, you're following this guy who is a Formula One race car driver, and he ends up getting into a traumatic accident that ends up like stunting his career. And he's like, now I think it's like 3 years later or something like that, and he's like very depressed. He's like living in like a black hole sort of thing. And then this girl ends up like coming into his life, and all of a sudden he is waking up. He wants to change. He wants to get to know her more. All of a sudden he's actually caring about things again. And you're kind of watching that storyline. You're kind of watching this guy go from a very depressed state into like, you know, a normal person again, and him wanting to like, you know, get back to his old life and stuff like that. So it was good for what it was, but I didn't really connect to it the way that I know a lot of other people connect to it. Like, people say that this is like their favorite book from the series, and I just like didn't necessarily really feel that. I think one of the big things about this entire series that I felt was that I've never had the urge to keep reading it. Like, every single book in this series, I always would like stop reading like mid-page, every other chapter, everything like that. Like, I just never really felt the need to like, you know, run through the books, and therefore it made it really hard to read all of them. And this book was no different. Like, I had a very hard time getting through it, even though it wasn't necessarily like a really bad book. I just like wasn't as connected to it as I needed to be to really like, you know, fly through the story. So either way, I feel like there were more stuff that I didn't love about it, but it wasn't a horrible book. Like, this was one of the better books that I read this month so far. So even though I had a bad month, yeah, anyway, whatever, it doesn't really matter. Didn't love it, didn't hate it, but I am happy that I finally finished the series. So yeah, that is that. And then the last book that I'm going to be sharing with you for today's video is The Mixtape by Brittany Cherry. So this is actually very similar to Redeemed in the sense of like, it was more of a story of watching this guy come out of a depressed state once this girl comes into his life. This guy was dealing with a lot of stuff. He was very famous. He's a rock star, and he was actually in a band with his twin brother. And then at the beginning of the book, his brother dies, and now he is like very depressed. He doesn't really know how to continue on with his life, how to continue on with his career, anything like that. And then he meets this girl, and he ends up giving her a job because like they met in a bar while he was like super drunk, and he ends up getting her fired. So he ends up offering her, you know, a chef position or something like that. And then they're going to end up like forming a friendship, and he's going to end up like wanting to get better because of her. So very similar to the setup of Redeemed, but like very different storyline. But either way, this book wasn't horrible. I kind of really did like how well we got to know the characters. And like, I think that while it was a romance, it wasn't necessarily like 100% focused on the romance. It was more focused on the things that both of these characters were dealing with, and watching this guy come out of like a depressive state and try to like get back to his normal life. And I kind of liked it, but at the same time, like, there were some stuff in this story that I didn't absolutely love. And I think, what was it that I didn't really love about it? I think it was all the other people that were were in these characters' lives. Like, her family were horrible people, and you were supposed to really hate them in the story, but like I really hated them, and I didn't really like how all of that was playing out. And then also, like, this guy had like an ex-girlfriend that was a real complete bitch, and I just really didn't like seeing all of like those side bad characters in the story. So it kind of pulled it down for me a little bit, and I feel like there was a little bit more that I didn't absolutely love. Like, I feel like I remember, like, I really liked the first half of it, and then it started like going downhill as like it started getting like more intense and more drama filled and everything like that. So whatever, overall, I didn't love the book, but I didn't hate it. So yeah, it is what it is. But anyway, that is all of the books that I had to share with you for my June wrap up. I'm curious to hear what books you read in the month of June. Hopefully you had a better reading month than I did. So either way, leave me a comment down below. And if you enjoyed watching this video, then please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you're not already subscribed. And either way, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And until next time, enjoy reading.